You're listening to Bussiness Eye, sponsored by your local enterprise office in Dunleary Rathdown. Together, we're making it happen.
And welcome, folks, to week whatever in lockdown. Yes, myself and Simon again have two amazing guests. Number 29 in the entrepreneurial Apple podcast chart as well. That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to mention it if you didn't know. I think we've worked hard, Joe, and we've got great guests, and we've got two really good guests today as well.
We do. We have waiting patiently. This week we're going to be talking about diversity and inclusion in Ireland. And one thing, when people hear these words, they think of data points, they think of processes, but there's more to that. It's about culture, it's about communication, and it's about individual growth as well. So on that, we have two amazing guests. Our first guest that we have is Sandra Healy. Sandra is the founder and director of UCD Centre of Excellence at Diversity and Inclusion, and the founder of Inclusio software. And over the last 14 years, she has been championing diversity and inclusion in Ireland, and I believe is the leading expert over here as well. So Sandra, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thank you. And just one small correction. I'm actually Dublin City University, not UCD.
And our second guest is equally prestigious. And I hope I spelled this right, Pedro. It's Pedro Ontivero. Pedro is project lead of the Research Centre of Excellence for Diversity and Inclusion at DCU, Dublin City University. Position I think you've held for over a year now. He's an organizational consultant specializing in people-driven change management and organizational development. And it says here he has an inherent understanding of how difficult change is. So I think we might focus a little bit on that, because there are challenges that I'm hearing and I see going forward. And you have a passion for diversity and inclusion. So it's an honor to have you here, Pedro. It's great to see you.
Thank you very much, Simon and Joe.
It's great to have you on, you guys. So tell us, I want to sort of say, define what inclusion and diversity is for someone who doesn't know.
I might go first, Joe, and that's a question that we get asked all the time, and I would say that it's an evolving definition. From my perspective, when I think about diversity, I think about individuals. So, to Simon's point around, sometimes organizations kind of think about diversity in categories like gender, race and ethnicity and things like that. But really, for me, when I think about diversity and the work we do, is very much about focused on individual difference. So an acceptance and an understanding that every one of us is really different. And when it comes to inclusion, and in particular inclusion in the place, really it's around creating an environment where people feel welcome, they feel connected to the mission of the organization, and they have an opportunity to be their best and to give their best and to contribute to something that's bigger than themselves. And from a human perspective, that's what we need. We need to be able to feel like we're contributing and we have an opportunity to connect.
Pedro, how would you add to that? Because that was great, Sandra. And for me, I'm hearing more and more that inclusion is not just about diversity and gender balance. It's about psychological safety. It's about neurodiversity. It's about allowing people who have imposter syndrome or who are introverts to feel equally valid. It seems to be an increasingly large area from a scope perspective. What do you think, Pedro?
Well, just to add to Sandra's definition, I would say that regardless of what different we are, we deserve the same opportunity. For me, this is the definition of inclusion. And sometimes when we talk about diversity, people ask what it is that. But for me, diversity and inclusion is regardless of what different we are, and we have the same opportunities, we are able to have safe conversations. When we are able to talk about who we are, regardless where I am, this is a safe conversation, and I am not being judged for my opinions, my background, my academia. So when we are able to have safe conversation, that for me is inclusion.
And can I just add to that? And it's a good point you make, Simon, around the equality and equity, and we start to think about that. Because if I think about some of the work and the journey we're on in higher education, in particular over the last 2 to 3 years, and we focus on universal design. So exactly what you described there, around, complexity of when you have people with personalities, different backgrounds, different capabilities, how do you create that inclusive environment, that everybody is considered? So a lot of the work we've been doing in higher education, and again, it probably last 3 to 4 years, I'd say, across the UK, and now we've started to adopt it in Ireland, is this concept of universal design. So consider, to Pedro's point there around equal opportunity, so things like, for example, making sure that there's equitable access to the hiring process for everybody, regardless of your capability or what way you would like the interview process to be arranged. So it's really taking into consideration the variables of humans and making sure then that that there's equitable access and equal opportunity for everybody.
Sandra, can I ask you a question? What was your driving force to sort of take up the challenge and sort of drive this home within the country?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joe. So I spent 20 years in the telecoms industry working across the UK and Ireland before I came into higher education. So my background in diversity and inclusion was very much on a voluntary basis when I was in industry. And I think really what brought me to diversity and inclusion is my fundamental value of fairness. Right. So for me, it's really, really important. And it's just an integral part of things for me that it's fairness. So what I started to notice throughout my career is that it wasn't necessarily equitable for different people, not necessarily myself, but I started to notice that it wasn't the same for people around me. And when I always get asked for that, what's that one piece of advice? What's the one thing you'll say? And it's the one thing that I live by, which is don't step over it. So when I started to notice the unfairness and in equitable practices within the organizations I was working in, I was saying to myself, I can't step over this now and just leave this behind for somebody else to fix. Yeah. So that's really where it comes from.
That's interesting, Sandra. And Pedro, I'm hearing more and more that we need to be more deliberate and definitive with this stuff, because just today I'm hearing that some of these delivery cyclists predominantly from Brazil are getting targeted now on their bikes, and so there's that side of the thing, and then there's all sorts of issues around gender bias, and there's so many complications out there, and if to what extent it's very easy for the lay stander or the bystander just to ignore this stuff and say it's not their problem, but to what extent do we all have to now really stand up, right, and start being deliberate in calling this?
Yeah,
absolutely. You broke
absolutely.
up there, Simon. Sorry, calling what, Simon? You broke up.
Yeah. To what extent do we all have to be deliberate in calling this out?
Well, I would say, Simon, that it is very important to be aware about our unconscious biases. We all have them, and sometimes people think, well, I have unconscious bias, that is something bad, and actually it's not bad at all. We need unconscious bias because unconscious bias help us to save time and to take quick decisions. But the problem is in the workplace when we are taking decisions. And I think the step number one is to be aware that we have unconscious bias, to understand, that we can be more connected to people who are like me. People like themselves. We feel more connected to people who look like me, the same color of skin, speak my same language, the same accents, etc. Everything which is different for me is going to be out of my comfort zone. We naturally try to be close to what we know. What is different is unsafe. It is out of our comfort zone. So I would say number one is be aware about our unconscious bias. And number two is to see how can I make small changes in my day-to-day basis, But again, number one is awareness.
I think one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years is, and just in the conversation, I'm gathering that we have all travelled as well. And I think when you do actually step outside your own country and go into different cultures, you sort of, that diversity changes and that mindset changes as well. For myself personally, I've been all over the world in probably maybe about traveled for being 18 years and longer, and I've met different nationalities in different countries. And that has allowed me to understand that everybody is one. We are all equal on it. And then when you come back to Ireland, I've always noticed then when you came back to Ireland, the Irish themselves are very much clannish. Even to other Irish people, there's a network of friends, and it's even very hard to get into that network. But as I'm hoping, as the next generation is coming up, because the country is now very multicultural, that stigma and that relationships all drop, and we all then start to be very united on it. In saying that, do you agree with what I'm saying, or would you disagree with what I'm saying?
I think a little bit of both, Joe, and I think I suppose there's two things, and it's going back into a point that Simon made around deliberate effort, right? And then we have Pedro talking about, the unconscious becoming conscious, like the challenge that we have. And we have an opportunity as well, but let me talk about the challenge first, right? The challenge we have is that it's not going to happen without deliberate effort. And when we think about how all those unconscious things that were programmed into us in the society that we grew up in, and programmed through our culture, and now being programmed into us through the media. And the challenge with that is, unless we interrupt and make that unconscious conscious, things are not going to change. So let me just give you an example of that, of how. And again, sorry, just going back to what Simon said around this concept of deliberate action. What I'm proposing here is around this concept of being an upstander, not a bystander. And I do some work with, and I'm on the advisory board of the Anti-Bullying Centre in DCU. And when they look at this concept of upstander, that's what they promote within schools, right? So you don't stand by and allow somebody to be disrespected. So to give you an example, I was doing a talk for an organisation there a little while ago. And one of the women, she's a woman of African descent, professional in the banking sector, and she was telling me that on the bus she was racially abused on the bus on the way into work one day. And she said, when I think about the impact that had on me, she said, I don't blame the ignorant person who racially abused me. She said, but I absolutely was so disappointed and hurt with all the other people who sat around and allowed it to happen. Yeah. Because the people who sat there and didn't say anything, that their silence meant that they aligned with the person who was abusing rather than herself.
That's a very deep point, Sandra, and it's something I grew up in England, right? But I'm British, Irish, and Australian citizen, and I've lived here. I've been out of England for 20 years, so I'm kind of watching it as a semi-bystander living in Ireland. And what I see, and I also do a lot of work around cultural astuteness and cultural assimilation in companies. And one of the companies, an aviation company with 350 staff from 87 countries. And what I'm hearing is that people who are not indigenous from Ireland, even if they're from just England, right, there are these biases, right? There is a certain level of abuse, but when you listen and talk to indigenous Irish people, most of them don't realize this is happening, right? So there seems to be a big disconnect. And why do you think that? Maybe, Pedro, is that accurate? And if that is accurate, why is that disconnect there?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Simon?
Yeah, I was just saying that, there seems to be a bit, Ireland's a wonderful place, right? But I do get the impression that most, law-abiding, good Irish citizens in Ireland don't realize the level of racism that's going on.
Yeah, I think we actually, naturally, we try to, it is really difficult to see yourself. We normally see like, exclusion, that is not, I am not exclusive, I am very inclusive. I don't like to exclude anyone. It is quite difficult to see yourself and to be aware of you are missing something or you are acting in a exclusive way. So number one, so that is naturally we do that because we don't want to be seen as we are not being inclusive. So what I would say is that is something natural that happened. And number two is, again, we have to be aware about what we are missing. We know that here in Ireland, we have seen a lot of people coming from different countries, nationalities, and a lot of people are changing their point of view. I'm going to tell you an example. I was conducting the Race Equality Forum, so we had people from different countries, nationality, ethnicity, skin color, etc. And we had actually Irish Black people. And she was telling us that she's being asked all the time, where did you learn your English? Your English is so good. It is perfect. And she said, actually, I am Irish. I don't know any other language. I am Black Irish. So I think, that kind of situation where people, skin color, and I'm going to tell you a personal story. I have a daughter, and obviously she's not white. She's like my skin color, a little bit dark. And the doctor said, you know what? She said to my wife, I wasn't there because I was working. And my wife went to the nursery and she said, your baby has a weird skin color. And my wife asked, what do you mean by that? And she said, why she's not like your color? She's not white. And she said, no, my husband, he's actually Venezuelan and he's not white. And she was, I'm so sorry. But I think there is, and she wasn't rude, she was just, for her, it was not normal to not be white. You know what I mean? So now we can see how the culture is changing, and you started to see people from different nationalities, and the conscious and the awareness is changing as well. Yeah. I think we're evolving as a society.
I think we are, because if you look at the culture and going back to probably in the 1990s, if you had come over to Ireland then, and I had friends who came over from England, and they said the only people that they saw in Ireland that time was white people. There was very little multicultural on it. And then as time grew on, so that was the growth within the country, and that is changing. The other thing that with Sandra, what you were saying about the person being bullied, I've experienced in that as well. And, I blame the bully, but I also blame all the people that was around who in that organisation who stood by as well. But we're telling stories. I was getting my haircut a long time ago, and the barber said, all the foreigners that are coming into the country robbing all the jobs. And I said to him, how dare you? I says, do you not understand that the Irish are, there's 70 million Irish around the world. There's 35,000 in America. Maybe you forgot that in the 1980s, we went to Ireland, or we went to England, and it was don't hire Irish, or don't hire blacks, or we were abused in New York and all. So, you have to remember, before someone says, foreigners, the Irish are probably the biggest foreigners around the world as well. And what I fear, and what really upsets me about why people are angry, or people are frustrated, or people are rude towards foreigners, and I believe that is education and fear. I really think it is, that if we can sort of drive this into our education system, which it is happening because our schools are coming multicultural, but then into the education, into our organizations, and teaching people that, it starts with education. You and me will probably, Sandra, or Pedro or Simon will never solve it. It's the next generations that are coming up that are going to make this acceptable.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I might just pivot there a little bit. I might start with you, Sandra. And we haven't mentioned gender, right? And so I spoke to another expert in Ireland around this, a D&I expert, and she said to me, well, actually, a bigger problem in Ireland is lack of gender balance, right? What are you seeing around that? Are you seeing, or is that an excuse not to deal with this wider cultural issue? What do you think, Sandra?
Yeah, I think, well, thankfully, what we've started to do and what we see in Ireland, and particularly across Europe as well, is starting to track gender representation. So, I think I would imagine that comment that was made was probably very much looking at the boards in Ireland, which there's a laser focus on now at the moment, okay? And again, it has been happening across Europe, and in particular in the UK. So just to give you a bit of context, right, around why does it matter? Okay, so some of you may have heard of the 30% Club, others may not, but the 30% Club essentially is based on a piece of research that shows if you have any less than 30% of the minority around the table, it is near impossible to break through groupthink. Okay, So if you think about that, right, if you have 10 of exactly the same or very similar people sitting around a table having to make decisions and consider all others, you're not going to get that diversity of thought. You're not going to get the representation. So obviously organizations start with what we can see, right? And the gender piece is very visible for us to see as a difference. And in as well as that, there's a lot of research that shows that if you get the gender representation piece right, that what actually starts to happen is you break through the groupthink, and what happens is all the other aspects of diversity start to become part of the consideration of that group. So there's a business case behind it. There's an economic case behind it, and I know we don't have time to go into some of the poor decisions that were made through groupthink in the past, right? But there is, and so it's not just around a philosophical or a representation visibility thing. There's a rationale as to why this is the right thing for us as a country.
Tell me, what changes do you believe that we need to make within or in the country moving forward?
Well, for me, I think it's everything we've talked about here, Joe, right? And I think the one theme that for me is coming out here is about that representation. It is around being an upstander, and it is about being inclusive, being conscious, and being brave, right? This is new for all of us. As Pedro said, people like themselves. It's the way we're wired. So we're going to have to get out of our comfort zone just a bit, be welcoming. It's not nice being the minority. It's not nice being excluded from any perspective. And what it takes to include is the one person making an effort to include. So it's collectively our responsibility to do that.
There's a saying that, you could be in a bar with 100 people on your own and you'll still be the loneliest person on the planet. So, I think I'm blessed. People that know me, I walk into a room, and when I leave the room, I know everybody in the room, and I chat to everybody. And I with gender balance as well. And Simon has heard me personally speak about this before. I learned a long time ago from my sister, who was an entrepreneur and very successful here in Ireland. And I've never seen this, because I grew up that it was, men and women were equal, and only when then traveling around the world. And then when I came back and people were talking about this, I was genuinely shocked that some women were being paid less than men, or they were in position. I couldn't get my head around it, because I thought it was just, my motto is, and I believe it is, that we are all one. And if we can get to prove, people to realize that, we take down the barriers, we take down the culture, we take down the color of our skin, we take down the gender, and remember we are all one. And if we can do that, life can be very good for everybody.
You're so right. You're so right, Joe. And Pedro, I spent time in Australia, and I was a CEO for an American Aboriginal company, Inuit company in Australia, as a white guy, right, from overseas in Europe. And so I experienced racism between Aboriginal groups, American and Australian, between Australian Aboriginals and white Aboriginal Australians. So I saw it all, and I was in the middle of all this stuff, and it just blew my head up, because I thought, well, hang about, what, of course we created these barriers on the planet because we lived in these little micro pockets called countries, right? But when you think about it, there's 7.5 billion people on this one rock. We're on one rock, not 7.5 billion. Do you think the fact that I'd like to think the fact that we're all now connecting more online, surely those artificial national barriers should start, and cultural barriers should start breaking down? Or am I just a dreamer, Pedro?
Well, no, that's something that I think is happening. Actually, I think nowadays, because we are all connected, as you said before, the globalization is helping us to improve ourselves in that way. I think at the moment, a lot of us are working with different people, nationalities, time zone as well. So I think there is something which is happening. However, I would say that we have to be aware that still this is a problem that we have to solve. This is a problem that has to be solved. And I believe when we have that in mind, we can improve, we can be more inclusive. But the problem is when we hide that, when that is hidden, that is the problem. But if you have in mind, there is a problem that has to be solved. We are not inclusive as we believe we are. I think we can evolve. We can move forward to the next step.
Is it a case as well when people do come into the country, that, are they, are they told of a stereotype, of the Irish people? We used to be, Kate me the fault, you're 100 when you're welcome. So, and is it different to when they come here? Pedro, I'll open that up to yourself.
Well, to be honest, in my opinion, I think I have been very lucky here. I have to say, I only had really difficult experience when I was applying for a job. I had an interview and someone said, well, we can't hire you because you don't have local experience. You don't know how the Irish market works. But I have been very lucky in general. But I believe we all of us have our own belief about different countries, But I think we need to ask questions, I think we normally try to assume because we don't want to see ourselves like, oh, I don't know about that culture, about that people. And I believe it is very important to ask questions, and try to not assume. I'm going to tell you an example. Every time that when I go out, people, if I help someone to do something, people say, oh, obrigado. And people look at me like and I was like, oh, and I didn't respond because I don't know Portuguese, but people assume that I am Brazilian, for example. So because people don't want to ask, because people assume that every people who are not white, who are my skin color, are from Brazil. You know what I mean? But I think if we start to ask questions, we start to change, the way that we connect to people and try to not assume.
Yeah, I think it's important. I know we're coming to the end. I know, Sandra, you have to shoot off. I think this conversation could last a lot longer. One of the things, I'll ask both of you before you go. If I am a CEO in an organization, what is the one thing that I can do today to start helping diversity and inclusion within my organization?
Okay, I'll take that one first, Joe. For me, I think it is around its visibility. It's around representation, as I mentioned, and it can be quite difficult for leaders to get a sense of, well, what do I need to do here, or where do I start, or if I start talking about this and I get it wrong, how am I going to look, and things like that. So, and also we have to remember that when somebody steps out of the group, they automatically become excluded for that moment of the group. So it's actually quite a brave, and I think we need to recognize that and not underestimate it. That it is actually a brave move for the, we'll say, male CEO in this case, that has to step out of their group and start to consider and represent what it's like for people who are different, and for the other, if we can use that term. So for me, starting to educate yourself, and how do you do that? Having conversations with people that you probably wouldn't normally have conversations with, and people in your own organization. I describe it as the voice of the people. Absolutely critical. The most powerful thing you can ever do is listen and ask the voice of the people in the organization. Is what can we do? But that physical, visible representation at the top cannot be underestimated, because certainly in all the work we do within the centre, and in all my experience, if you don't have that, it's near impossible for you to drive the cultural change you need across the organisation.
And Pedro, to yourself?
Yeah, I would say it is important to create spaces, where you have the opportunity to hear your team, because first of all, we need to understand what different we are and to hear others' opinions. I think creating spaces is very, very, very important and key, I would say.
Simon?
I heard recently, I don't know whether I got it right, but diversity is sending an invite to people out to your dinner party, whereas inclusion is actually have them sit down at the table with you, and I kind of like that way of looking at it. If you're going to do this deliberately and mean it, right? So,
yeah, definitely. Sandra, Pedro, thanks for coming on to the show. It's been a pleasure. And folks, myself and Simon will be right back after the break.
You're listening to Business Eye, sponsored by your local enterprise office in Dunleary Rathdown. Together, we're making it happen.
Welcome back to Business Eye. That was interesting, Simon, wasn't it?
I was really, really interesting. I guess one thing we didn't get around to talking about, and maybe we could do this at a later date, is that, how you measure this stuff, put metrics on this. How do organizations keep themselves accountable? Because I know, Sandra, through her business Inclusio, they do that. So maybe we could have a conversation at a later date about KPIs and metrics and accountability, because I think it's really important that instead of just talking about it, I think companies really need to measure this. If what you can't measure, you can't deal with, kind of thing. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I believe it starts with conversation. It's understanding where the organization is, where the starting point, and where they want to end up. It's like a company going, okay, we're going to do this, and they go right, and they don't know where to start, or they don't know the process that they need to implement it, and where do they want to be at the end of it. And sometimes I just scratch my head. I really do scratch my head that people don't get this. When Patrick, a researcher, was doing some work on this, and I sent him an email, and I said, I thought this was just common sense. You've educated me because, maybe it's because we've traveled.
I think that's a big part of it. If you've traveled and you've seen the world, and you realize, as I said on the earlier on, that we're all 7.5 billion people on the same planet. We have different colored hair. So why can't we have different colored skin? We come from different families. So why can't we come from different cultures? It's the mindset that was entrenched, hundreds of years ago. And we need to break free of this stuff. It's boring, isn't it? It's lazy, isn't it, Joe?
I think we are breaking free. I really do. I think, and that's what we're saying, the next generation, their kids, when two children are born, they don't look at color skin. They don't look at, the language. I've seen my daughter when she was a baby playing with another child, and none of them spoke the same language, and they fed off the energy off each other. And then for some reason it's educated into us, or it's driven into us, from all the stuff around us. And only when you step above that and go, it's nice to have friends from different countries. You educate yourself.
Exactly. And the same with companies as well. Those companies that are more balanced and diverse, and manage that cohesively, it's being proven now on the stock markets that their brand equity can go up and their profitability can go up. But as Sandra said, CEOs need to have the guts to take that on board. But if they do properly, you're actually seeing returns in companies.
It's interesting you say that, talking about the stock market. Look what's happening in the stock market in the States. We chat about it during the week on it, which is GameStop. Short stop selling. And the price is shooting up, and there's something going on there. And I watched a documentary on a part of research the other night, and someone was saying in the documentary, they were saying part of these, what they were selling, are holding back is make believe. There's something going on it as well.
It's the little man also standing up to Wall Street, and I was listening to a fair bit as well this during the week, and Wall Street's genuinely concerned that they're losing their grip on controlling this stuff, So
but stopping people from buying, so they can still be in control on it. And the other thing what I've noticed is with gold last week was down about $25, the lowest it's ever been. And then the same thing is what's happening. People are buying it; it's going up. But I've seen then that one of the big American stockbroker houses were saying, they were publishing that silver isn't going up and everything is grand. And there's people going, hang on, they're lying here, because it is rising. So it's mad.
But you know, on a lighter note, do you know what I'm going to invest in? Hairdressers.
Yes, hairdressers indeed.
I need a haircut, Joe.
But I think we all do. Hairdressing, and women are asking about their nails, or is it manicures, or I don't know.
I think so, manicurist.
A couple of things as well. Fáilte Ireland there's a fund coming for 55 million for the tourism. It's called Survive to Thrive, which is funny. That was something that we did in a show a long time ago. That's coming up, and Minister Burke as well has announced another further commercial rate package for the hospitality, childcare, and entertainment and retail as well. So all this money's being pumped out, and it's great. The question that I loved an answer for: who's going to pay it all back? Who's going to pay it all back? you know?
Yeah, I think you know, there's just a kind of a denial thing. There's a hope that interest rates don't start going up in the next few years. You know, I think there's this assumption that it'll be grand, they won't go up, and you know, for another decade, and that's another government's problem. But fingers crossed that they're right.
Yeah, well, I think if they do, there'll be, you know, a lot of people suffering on it. But look, you know what I'm saying to people, I love to buy Irish. That is, you know, being pushed around the country as well. So if you want to spend money, buy Irish. It's going to help you. It's going to help your kids. It's going to help the local community as well. Yeah, and all I always say, you know, lateral thinking. Don't take everything as face value and question everything. That's everything, you know, in your own business, in your own life, in the political system, whatever it may be as well. So just, you know, use the noggin, as my dad would say. Use the noggin. Use the noggin. Use the noggin. Used to add something onto it as well, but I won't say that on
we'll
it.
bleep that one out.
Yeah, we'll leave that on it. So, son, what's the plans for the weekend? Anything exciting? Dinner out, you know?
No, definitely not. maybe get a Mars bar on the walk or something. Just a bit of exercise, and I hope it's not going to get too snowy, because I love walking. You know, I love walking. Within my 5K, I can get down to Sandy Mount, and you know, I love just getting out in nature. You know, that really has kept me going. You know, for the last year, walking along the River Dodder and, you know, Sandy Mount. I've never realized how important nature was to me until this time.
Connection. You know? Yeah, it is. It's part of us. It's part of us.
Yeah.
Anyway, folks, look, this is another week of Business Eye. I want to say thanks for tuning in. Next week, we're going to be speaking on innovation, as we said, and we're going to be speaking to people about the great reopening as well. An interesting movement that is trying to get people to
I just want to give a big
prepare their business to reopen in the future.
Involved here at
Until
Dublin
then,
South FM.
have a blessed weekend.
Rice,
and myself and Simon will talk to you later. Patrick Healy, who helps us with our research each and every week, and Simon as well, my co-host, and not forgetting all the engineers. So from ourselves here at Dublin South FM, have a great weekend, be safe and look after yourself.
Sponsored by the Dún Laoghaire Rathdown Local Enterprise Office. You're listening to Business Eye on Dublin South FM.